All right, everybody. We are back again for another episode of the Coach's Compass. Now it's season 6, but remember, I don't know what episode we're on. We just continue to record, continue to bring on cool guests from all across the world. Remember, hit that like, subscribe, comment button so we continue to have the same growth, continue to bring on cool guests from all over the world. Now I've got another special guest with me here today. I've got Coach or Dr. Nick Serio. He is cultivating confident flamethrower, strength, velocity, psychology, owner and operator of Velo University, which is online or on-site or remote training, which is Velo University is also the #1 training app for remote baseball development. Coach, thank you and welcome to the Coach's Compass.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Coach, if we look back to the very beginning, right, before you get all these certifications, before you start training all these people, what were some things that you were chasing back then that right now you don't even care about?
Wow. I mean, this industry has changed so much. I've been in it a long time. I graduated from college in 2008. So the industry was vastly different then, right? We didn't, Facebook had just come around. Instagram was like not really this like important thing. God, I wish I paid attention to it then. Um, you know, you got these guys that have these legacy followings on there just because, they were one of the first creators. But yeah, I mean, things that I don't know. For me, I think a lot of things have changed. And then I think a lot of things haven't changed, right? You still have to do the hard things. And I think the fitness industry right now, fitness, maybe some sport, is trying to find ways to make it sound a lot easier than it should be. And I think everybody's coming out with like, you can just train your fascia and you don't need to lift heavy weights and you can do these things. And it's like, okay, yeah, you can get a lot of people hooked on things like this. But when you break down the science, that doesn't make any sense. Like, I just think for me, uh, I think we've lost a little bit of touch of what the purpose of a weight room is, and I think there's a lot of things to be gained in a weight room. But more importantly, we're trying to teach an athlete how to express force, and I think that's a little lost on the industry right now. And for me, I've lost that throughout the time. I'm guilty of the same thing. Getting caught up in trying to do the next greatest exercise that looks sport specific, or hey, this might transfer better, and so on and so forth. But I think that's the nature of the beast too. I think you got to be okay with making mistakes. The and stop me because I'll ramble. But like,
No, keep going, Coach, because you're saying a lot of true things that might hit some people at home a little bit. They're like, "What do you mean? Like, I can't do sport specific?" Like, I'm also like, you're in a sport that's like very niche, I would say nowadays. And then like you've got a lot of people that want to specialize very early on, going to all these tournaments. And hey, I'm just a pitcher at 12 years old, and hey, I've got to do like this arm training, like you said, I got to train the fascia and all. And you're just like, wait, hold on. Like, what happened to the basics? Like the other things that made you a great athlete that helped you throw better and get onto the field more and like actually throw those high velocities. But but you're asking a guy that didn't do much in baseball. I was more of a football and track guy, right? So like there is the difference in what you guys do and how you guys train, but it's also like you said, like the importance of the weight room. And you get lost in the sauce because you look at social media, it's wild nowadays. So like how do you, because you're going to get the young athletes, right? You're going to get those 12, 13-year-olds that like, hey, I just want to play baseball all year round. How do you kind of tell them and their parents that like, hey, like the weight room is just as important and also to be able to throw those high velocities?
yeah, I think, well, two things. So nobody's ever been too athletic, right? That's nobody's complained like, oh man, that kid's just too athletic to play the sport, right? So baseball is certainly one of the more skill oriented sports, right? It does require enormous skill acquisition in order to play at a high level. Does that mean that I have to do that skill 24/7, 365? Oh, in fact, there's plenty of research out there to support variability being way more of an impact than repetitive, just beating down the same concept. But how do we get that message across? People in today's world, especially in the baseball world, it's so data heavy that they need numbers to back up the claim that you're making. We have proprietary algorithms that can show an athlete uh, with like 92% accuracy where they're exactly missing in terms of what's holding them back, right? So when an athlete's energy production is the thing holding them back from being able to reproduce the skill that they want to produce, it's very obvious to show them those statistics and be able to point them in the direction of, hey, listen, here's now how we're going to get there. So I think that helps quite a bit. I think, like you said, people get lost in, I need to perfect these very specific skills. And we forget that, like, for us, we have a very simple literacy paradigm that we bring an athlete through. It starts off with movement literacy, which just basically means an enormous amount of variety in taxing them through basic human movements: squat, hinge, pull, crawl, press, all of those, and add as much variety as humanly possible and stress them. And then just pick your variables of stress, right? So whether that is time, whether that is load, whether that is the speed at which you're asking them to do it, whether that is the amount of volume or density that you're asking them to do it, you have all these different variables of stress. And I think what we often forget is we're just managers of stress, and we're trying to figure out how, at certain points, how close to the threshold of stress can I get for this athlete to create the desired adaptation. So once we've progressed them from movement literacy, we're now headed into what we call tension literacy. When you think of an individual, most of the time, a novice lifter is unaware of how to generate or maintain tension within their body as they're completing a lift. If you've ever seen a kid squat and it looks like their knees are moving all over the place, or their back is rolling on them, they're not creating tension. So I compare this, if you've ever seen, people roll up a bottle and then flick the top off. So
Yeah.
imagine rolling up that bottle and then unwinding it before you go flick the top off. The top is not going to go anywhere. You haven't created any force because you didn't have any tension to use that force off of. And our objective during that phase is to teach an athlete how to generate tension. So we use a heavy focus on the eccentric portion of a movement, and that may be time, maybe our variable there. It may be load, and then from there, we want them to be able to control the amortization phase. So the next piece is going to be force control. Um, where we get hurt is primarily in the transition between, a cut, an eccentric to concentric action, right? So we need them to be able to produce force in, the first 50 milliseconds of a movement, not just simply relying on stretch shortening to get us where we need to get to. So we will often try and progress an athlete from initially, if you've ever seen, like, and you have, but like younger athletes will move a bar slowly down at the start because they're intimidated by the load.
Yep.
Well, as we bring them through this, our objective is to get them to move that bar very fast down through the eccentrics and then have the capacity to stop that barbell and then hold that barbell and then elicit force off of that. And once they've gone through these phases, right? And again, we may bring our pro athletes when they first come back home through, very small versions of some of those expressions. And then we get them into VBT. And I don't say VBT from the sense that, like, oh, we're going to train 0.8 meters per second because that's what power is. What we do is we use VBT as a intensity barometer, and we're ensuring that every single rep, um, regardless of what percentage I'm training at, is 100%. And there's no junk reps being provided in the session. And then there's a vast variety of ways that we implement that as well. But again, like I said, sorry, I'm rambling, but
No, it all makes sense, and it makes perfect sense on how you're doing things, but there's also a piece that you got to how you got to where you're at now to understand these different parts to put them through. What's a belief that you had when you first came into this industry, or some things that you kind of did with your athletes before that you're like, why was I even doing that back then? Like, it's this the system
sure.
is this simple, you know?
Well, mindless volume. I think there's a time and place for volume. I think, there's a time and place for an athlete figuring out what they can handle and what they can't. But I also think that the risk reward there oftentimes just isn't there. So having an athlete go through 5 rounds of 10 deadlifts is just pointless. Like, what are we doing if we're not monitoring some stress parameter in that? So is it the speed at which they're moving it? Like, essentially, where I have messed up in my career is giving an athlete an exercise or a program without being able to clearly articulate the desired adaptation I was trying to get. And I don't know if there's one thing that I could point out. I have certainly been guilty of trying to make things too sport specific, where I've gone deep on the other end now, and to the point where if the weight room is about teaching an athlete how to produce force and how to produce it under certain time domains, then sport specific is irrelevant. My opportunity for skill development is done on a field, is done in practice. It should not be done in the weight room. I think we've been lied to that I need to do movements like a landmine press, that is significantly better than a bench press or an overhead press. If I can produce force at a higher magnitude and at a faster rate at a heavier load through these other parameters, then I'm learning how to produce force better. So to think that I need to train the scapula to move through the full range of motion with load like that, I'm never going to be able to move it as fast as it is going to move when I'm in the practice field. So the body is not going to connect those two areas. So I might as well just train for force output during the time that I'm in the weight room. So I've definitely been guilty of that, and, targeted shoulder care work and things like that. Most of that can be handled through just get fucking stronger. I think most people, I think we are, as an industry, we are guilty of moving young athletes out of strength development way too early because they're bored, we're bored, and it just takes a lot of time. Um, and there's a lot of variables we don't get to control. I don't know how much that kid's sleeping. Well, we have certain programs where I know exactly how much that kid's sleeping, but for the
Right.
most
Yeah.
part, I don't know how much that kid's sleeping. I don't know what he's eating outside of here. And this is for a lot of coaches. They may not have control over a lot of these areas. So you're controlling 2 hours out of a 24-hour day, or roughly, if you're seeing them 3 days a week, you're controlling 6 hours out of an entire week. What do you hope to accomplish? So I think our biggest enemy in this field is time. It's long been my feeling. It's why we created algorithms, because our objective is not to, how do I put this? I don't need to predict anything about somebody. I need to know how to allocate time precisely. That's the real objective.
Right. I mean, you also talk about fighting time, but there's also the fight between, the other coaches out there that are saying that you need to be sport specific, and then they've gotten into the parents' mind that they need to do all these specific drills and whatnot. But like, you're talking from like real world experiences, like, hey, like all that sports specific stuff you're talking about, like that gets handled on the field. That gets handled at practice, right? If they're not strong enough, they're not fast enough, like that's not developed here, right? All that other stuff doesn't even matter, right? We're talking about like fascia, scap, like all this different specific stuff. And then we think back to our younger days, like, did we do that? Like, were we trained that way, or were we just playing multiple sports so we became better athletes and just the weight room was the weight room?
I think we became better athletes. I don't think there was enough knowledge in the weight room. I don't think there was enough reliance on the weight room to help us generate force the way we potentially could have. I don't think there was enough knowledge from a nutritional perspective to help us gain weight. I mean, if I look back, the biggest difference between high school kids now compared to 20 years ago is what they weigh. They are roughly 15 to potentially 25 pounds heavier on average. And the impact that that has to sport is drastic. So I think that is something that we've really, that has really changed a lot of the way we see kids having the ability to play right now. But for the sake of, okay, how do you handle all the other noise, right? The worst thing a parent can do is compare their athlete to another athlete. Programs that you're going to go to are going to try and fit the athlete into the program, not the program around the athlete. And even though they may say they're not going to do that, and we have been guilty of that too. And that is okay. You're still going to help 80 to 85% of the athletes, but you're going to have 15% of them fall through the cracks. And when they're paying you a lot of money, you got to eventually try and solve that problem. It's just not fair. So, for me, yeah, you can try and compare yourself to the kid that genetically is nothing like your kid. And why can he get away with just doing basketball and your kid can't? Well, what were you in high school? What were you in college? You're not going to magically make a freak of nature if both parents were never athletes. It's just typically not going to happen. So if you want to make your son or daughter better than you were at sports, you're going to have to go to somebody knowledgeable enough to try and figure out where they're lacking.
I can only imagine what those conversations are like with parents that come in that have never played past, maybe even not even past like middle school, right? Like, or just played JV in high school, and they're talking about my kid is the next MLB player or next NBA player, and they're coming in walking to you. You're just like, hey, like, look at yourself and your wife or your significant other and look at your kid. Like, it's not there. Like, it's not the same as like a kid that's coming from, that's come from makeups of former professional athletes, right? It's just
Sure.
different. Like the genetic
Yeah.
makeups are just different. But like also, if you look at like some of the coaches, like the younger coaches that are kind of coming into the industry, if a coach were to follow you around for a week now, like just like shadow you for a week, what would the week look like to them? And what would be something that they're surprised that you absolutely don't do?
Ooh. Well, my life's a lot different now than it was when I was. I have a lot of different responsibilities for my company now, and I have a phenomenal team that pushes me in those directions. But let's presume they were following around our head guy instead. So they're going to see quite a bit of evaluations. I think we're like typically throughout the year we average about 5 or 6 a week. Um, at times there's 15, 20. At other times there's two. So, but it's about 5 or 6 throughout a week that they're going to see the coaches going through. That evaluation will take anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half. Then they're going to see we operate on a very sort of different structure than I think a lot of other facilities. So everybody in our facility has an account on our app. They're programmed through that app. So each athlete has a throwing coach and a strength coach. They work together in tandem to create the program. Every 2 weeks, the athlete is retested on force plates, some sports based movements like a 10, a 5, 10, 5, a broad jump. They are tested every month out on the throwing floor in a kneeling throw, med ball throws, and some other variations that we have. That's all put into a dashboard that each one of our athletes has access to. So they can see at any time how they're progressing through the program. And then the coaches use that same dashboard when they meet every 2 weeks to decide how they're going to adjust the given program. If adjustments are needed too. Like that's the other thing. Everybody is like, oh, it needs to be so individual. There's a period of time here where, we may have 75 athletes all doing theoretically the exact same strength program in the off season because it's not rocket science. Like you got to move the load. And if you want to grow, defend yourself against gravity. So like it's not rocket science. And I think we try and over dramatize how to do these things. And it's just really because most people are trying to find a way around doing the hard work.
Man, I love it. I love it because you're speaking a lot of facts. Because even for myself, being in the private sector side of things, like when I sit down with a lot of these parents and these athletes, like everybody in like that wants to do one-on-one training, they want to be super specialized, specific. Like I want my program specific to me, and it's like, hey, like the kid that just came in and sprinted, like you need to also sprint, right? Like so, sometimes your program will look like the other one, but it might just be little modifications in weight or what the range of motion is that we're working on that day for certain things. Like there might just be little changes, but it might look exactly the same as the last kid that just walked in. It just it's going to help you too, right? Because you need to do the basic things, right? And
Yeah.
that's
I
just a
mean,
lot of conversations I have.
so no program has more than 4 exercises on a given day. So we program 4 exercises. Everybody that is like at the same point or of the same sort of training age or something like that might have something very similar, right? But then you're going to have variations in, let's say, for example, I have a guy, baseball's a very unique sport, right? And a lot of times, you know, I'll have these conversations with, let's say, physical therapists who are under the ideology, many of them, not all, that the body needs to be symmetrical. Cool. If you make a baseball player symmetrical, you will ruin him. There is a reason he is asymmetrical, and it is because that's what has made him great. And the more research that continues to come out now, we are now learning that probably the wrong researchers that we had on these were physical therapists and surgeons who were trying to fit athletes into a box, as opposed to realizing, hey, his front side may have more internal rotation and his backside may have more external rotation. So when we have an athlete like that, we're not going to put him in a bilateral squat, right? Because there's just going to be a discrepancy in the way that looks. If you've ever seen people complain, oh, why does he have butt wink on one side or this or that? Because not everybody's designed the exact same way. And if they throw 96, don't try and think about what you're changing. Figure out how to maximize the way they already move. So what I meant by that is like, yeah, we might have 4 exercises, and exercise one might be a deadlift. But if I got a guy that has an enormous amount of IR, he's not doing a sumo deadlift. He's going to do a hex or a traditional pull. If I have another guy that's, hey, he's got his femurs are tremendously long and he's got this really short torso. You might do an elevated deadlift. You might do a rack pull. Doesn't matter. What is the purpose of what I'm trying to do? I need you to elicit a lot of force from a below hip range. Cool. I just need to figure out how to do that best with this kid. So I think that's where individualization comes in. It doesn't have to be that like that guy needs to do, 47 different exercises because his right pinky toe isn't aligned.
I love it. I love it, coach, because there's so many things that are so true here. But before we get out of here, right? Last question I got for you. Fast forward 10 to 15 years from now, what do you want people to say about who you are as a coach? Not just who you coached, but who is Coach Dr. Nicholas Serio? Like, who is he?
I would hope the athlete felt as though they had a relationship with me that was both empathetic and was trying to create fortitude in them for things outside of just their sport. I understand where most athletes are. And I think a lot of time from coaches, you do a great service to yourself and to the athlete to try and understand where they're coming from, try and understand where their upbringing is, and to figure out what the athlete wants to get out of why they're in your establishment. And I think once you can understand who they are and why they're there, you can reach them at a different level and try and figure out what is going to make them better as a human. And then how can I help them along their journey of sport? I think sport is incredibly valuable. I would argue it's more valuable than school. It teaches you so much about yourself, about life. It gives you so many opportunities to learn. And I'm coaching kids in a sport that's utterly impossible. I have guys that are in my building that throw 100 miles an hour that'll never play another day of baseball in their life. And, there's been 20,000 people to play in the major leagues. That's it. Doesn't even fill a major league stadium. So
Yeah,
the idea that you're getting there is so much of a lie. And yet we have kids that do it all the time. So like, it's cool.
I love it. I love it, coach, because it's the same way for on the other side of things with football. When you're trying to make it to the NFL, it's a small percentage, right? Same thing with any professional level, right? There's a very small percentage, but your sport, even tougher. I remember playing baseball in high school. I ain't make it past high school for a reason, right? Because I couldn't hit the ball. Right? All
Yeah.
I did was out
Yeah.
there stealing bases. But
Listen,
coach, I want to say thank you so much for today. Because
absolutely.
what you did today was come on and spit real fast, right? Real information that a lot of people are sometimes afraid to say because of the industries that they're in, the parameters that they have to stay within. But it's always awesome to have a coach come on and speak the truth about, just parenting, coaching, kids, like all that stuff, the things that they need to hear nowadays. And I appreciate you doing that.
Well, I appreciate it as well. Thanks for giving me the platform.
And we're out, coach.